Welcome back to Legacy Builders, everybody. We have a special guest on here today. I call him Pastor Aaron, but he also goes by Aaron Davis. But do you want to intro him, Dad?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started attending City Point Church, now called City Point Church, I met Aaron, and there's just something, and I know he feels the same. We would kind of talk about this. There's just this brotherly connection that he and I have, and when like minds come together, it's just the older we get, you start to realize people that are a lot like you and have similar character and personalities. And I mean, Aaron is just we've come to become friends, and just his character, integrity, just the way he leads his family, his wife, just an all around awesome guy. And we're just excited. Like Madison said, we wanted to, in our legacy series, we're talking about parenting. We just wanted to pick your brain for a little bit and just share with us, some stuff on parenting. And we love your mom and dad, and they're just an awesome family. Lisa is awesome, Rocky's awesome. So we just thank you for taking time to come on and share with us on this podcast, and we appreciate you and all you do.
I appreciate you guys having me. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be fun. Like you said, we've had lots of great conversations, and I figured going ahead and putting one of these on video would be a great opportunity for us both to just have a little bit of back and forth and some conversation. And I'm thrilled to have Madison here with us. Madison actually at one time was working with me on staff at the church, and she to this day still is one of the best employees that I've ever worked with. So Eric, you and Jody have done a great job in raising Madison and giving and teaching her a good work ethic. And yeah, man, it's this is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks. And just maybe to piggyback off of that a little bit, a lot of people mention that, and Madison knows she's already grinning, because when people compliment Jody and I always tell people we did our part, and you'll appreciate this, Aaron. We did our part, but she responded. Not all the kids respond. And, just like we see Rocky responds. And so they have a responsibility in growing too. And I'm just proud of Madison and her response to the things that we've pushed her to do and challenged her to do. And I had a guy one time working with me, he told me, he goes, well, your kids got it easy living with you. I said, oh, you think they have it easy, do you? I said, you might want to ask them. I told him, I said, you'd already gotten 3 whoopings today in the first hour we've been around. But no, they've responded very well. And, that, like I said, that's why our life.
I just want to go back, because you make it sound like you just whooped us all day and that was all that you did. That's not what happened.
No.
But sorry. I just want to make sure that people aren't thinking that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But he would have gotten 3 whoopings. You would have learned your lesson. You wouldn't have got 3 whoopings. You guys were quick learners.
That's true. Yeah.
He didn't learn so quick.
There we go. Yes.
So, before we get into the meat of it, we just like to give a little background about who you are, yourself, your family, where you come from. Let our listeners kind of get to know you a little bit first.
Okay, well, that can be a long, drawn out story. So go ahead and just stop me if I get to going a little bit too long. But born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Madison mentioned me being a pastor. I actually started in ministry when I was my son Rocky's age, who's 14. I preached my first sermon at 14 when Detroit was murder capital of the world. I was in the murder capital of Detroit, feeding the homeless and ministering to prostitutes and drug addicts and all kinds of fun stuff like that. Moved to Nashville, Tennessee in 1996 as a youth pastor to help start a church, and had a 3-year plan of moving to Nashville and then moving back to Detroit. And I got down here and I bought a house, and I thought that I was going to love it. And a year into it, I hated it. And I wanted to move back, but I had bought a house and the house wouldn't sell. And so it took about 3 years before I actually got to the point where I loved it here. But I did get to the point where I loved it. It was a major adjustment for me coming from the city, being a Detroit boy, moving down into, it wasn't just country, it was country. We were in Columbia, Tennessee. And, working with troubled teens, youth pastoring, became an associate pastor, ended up being offered a job as a police officer, which I never really saw how being a pastor I'd ever be able to be a cop, but it was the two things I ever wanted to do, pastoring and policing, and ended up being able to do both. I hired in as a school resource officer. They saw how I was dealing with the troubled teens in the area, and they were like, man, we're starting the school resource officer program, and we'd really love it if you would come and be a part of what we're doing. And did that for a few years. I was officer of the year in 2 years, and then was promoted to criminal investigations and SWAT. So I became a detective, SWAT team member. And then a few years into that stint, I had a couple of guys try to kill me. Medically retired now after had a year of physical therapy. And at the end of that year, they tested me and they said, sorry, you can't go back, you're done. And so then I faced a medical retirement. A year later, my son Rocky was born. Actually, from my medical retirement, only a few months later, my son Rocky was born. And I got to be a stay-at-home dad for a season, because that was in 2008 when the economy had crashed and you couldn't get a job and nobody was hiring broken cops. So it was a pretty interesting scenario. My wife going to work, me staying at home with my son, and being a stay-at-home dad, which in hindsight was a real blessing, although at the time it didn't feel like it. I really struggled with that dynamic, not being able to work. And then, and I think the truth be told, Eric, Madison, I had judged a lot of men for being in my shoes in the past. I had, as a school resource officer, I'd see these dads come and bring their kids to school, knowing that their wives were working, and their wives had good jobs, and I had a prejudice against what I was observing until I lived it. Truth of the matter is, God had blessed our family. My wife had a great job. She was making more money than I ever dreamed of making in law enforcement and things. But I couldn't have replaced her income because her job was so good. But I felt very troubled, not being able to provide for my family. It was a really very difficult situation that lasted years. And then in 2010, I hired on at the church that we're now at. I was a part of that church from 2004. But in 2010, I became part of the staff. I was hired on for their online ministry. And then the rest is history. Since I've been there, I was an online campus pastor. I've served in the associate slash executive pastor role. Now I am over the adults demographic under City Point. I'm over their adult demographic and different aspects of the facilities and operations and things of that nature. So I've really kind of run a gamut of jobs in ministry and jobs in law enforcement and owning my own businesses at times, and lots of different stuff. Married, I got married in 1996. I don't want to leave that out. That was actually happened just before we moved to Nashville, and had my son Rocky in 2008. So he's 14 now, and it's been quite a ride. I love Nashville. I love City Point Church, our church. I love what God's doing, and you couldn't pay me to go back to Detroit.
Right.
And you left out you're an author. You have a book.
I am. I've written several books, actually. Both of them, two of them. The first book I didn't tell people about. It was, that was my very first book, and I go back and read it, and I go, gosh, what were you thinking, dude? But I wrote a book called Quantum Christianity that went #2 on Amazon in its categories, and then I wrote a book called Limitless that went #1. So I've got a couple of bestsellers, and yeah, it's I love to write. Actually, it's probably one of my favorite things to do is to write.
Nice. So a little bit more background, maybe. Tell us about the background that we see right now. All these guitars. You moved to Nashville, and here's all these guitars, but there's a special story about that. Tell us about that.
I dabble a little bit in music. The first instrument I learned to play was guitar. I play a little bit of piano, a little bit of bass, a little bit of guitar, a little bit of drums, just enough to, in a church of 50 people, I can lead worship. And in a church in Nashville, like the church that we're in, where musicians are falling out of trees, I don't play instruments. I'm a hobbyist, and it's definitely not. I don't in any way claim to be a musician. But these guitars that are on the wall behind me were my father-in-law's, who passed away last year, and he was a musician. And my wife grew up watching him play. This guitar right here is he actually played that one professionally when he traveled and played. And so me and her sister, our family and her sister's family, all took some of his guitars. He had a bunch of them. Obviously, if we've got this many of them, we only got a portion of them. You can imagine.
Wow.
But yeah, and so we hung them on the walls, and Rocky and I actually just started this past week or 2 weeks ago teaching Rocky a little bit of guitar, and so yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I love it. I heard that you were telling us, about your background, and this being a Legacy Builders podcast, I just love the legacy. I love the background, and talking about parenting and what a great dad he was to Lisa, and just awesome I just wanted to throw that in on our legacy.
Well, my son is actually named after him. So Rocky is named after my father-in-law. That's
really?
Was his name. Yeah, we named him after Lisa's dad and my dad. So my dad's name is Lawrence, and so Rocky's name is Rocky Lawrence Davis.
Nice.
So cool.
Yeah.
That's
Very
incredible.
nice.
Yeah.
Well, so with that said, we're gonna kind of lead into the topic of parenting here. And so we are in the midst of our parenting series with Legacy Builders, and wanted to start off with the interesting question, because parenting, we talk about parenting, it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Ask some people about parenting, and for them it meant that they raised their kids up and put food on the table and roof over their head, which is nothing to it's not nothing to diminish that. But then other people take parenting to a whole new level, a whole different level, and want to raise kids a certain way, and they're really active in their kids' lives and stuff. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, how would you describe parenting?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's a different. I think it's difficult to define, guys. Ultimately, when you're talking about parenting, parenting, in my opinion, is different every day. It's facing the challenges that are placed before you, and working through them, whatever day that is. So if it's a great day, then we face the challenges of a great day, and we enjoy company, and we have a good time. And if it's a tough day, if it's a difficult day, last year Lisa got COVID real bad, my wife, and was in the hospital for weeks and almost died. And parenting took on a different definition during that season. Ultimately, I think probably the way that I could define it the best, when Rocky was in first grade, his teacher called me, and she said, "I'm having a real difficult time figuring out the best way to connect with Rocky, and I really need your help." And so I went in and I talked to her to find out, first of all, the challenges that she was facing. He's a very strong-willed child, always has been, very talkative, very, very communicative, very maybe even interrupting in a classroom setting. Just he was a student that had a high level of self-esteem, but created a dynamic in the class that he could easily take over the class if not properly guided. And so his teacher asked me, how should I handle this? And I said, well, the first thing that you need to realize is, from a parenting perspective, I'm not raising a child, I'm training a man. And ultimately, God has placed you, his teacher, in his life at this age of 6 or 7 years old, however old he was there in the first grade. I said, but God's placed him here for you to have influence, but I want you to realize that influence, what my expectation is as a parent, is that you are helping him to be a better man. And that's the approach that I take with everything that I do. The reason I write books is so that way my son knows what I think. I've told people for years, I coach people whenever they write books, and I tell them all the time, you have to define who you're writing to and what you expect to accomplish in what you're writing. If you don't define your audience, then you're going to have a real difficult time writing, because it's not going to be specific enough. Well, for me, my books since Rocky was born, which was Quantum Christianity and Limitless, both of those books I wrote for my son. if no one ever read them except for him, I would have accomplished exactly what I was desiring, because what my heart was to impart things that I know at this stage of my life. Granted, as he gets older and I get older, there'll be other things that I know and other things that I can learn. But honestly, Eric, if I died tomorrow, Madison, if I died tomorrow, my son would know what I believed, what I thought about very key issues. My voice would continue to live on and be able to instruct him, because I took the time to write. What you end up writing lives after you. And so for me, that's an aspect of parenting. It's securing legacy. You mentioned a minute ago the possibility of, for some parents, it's putting a roof over their head and food on their table. That is an aspect of parenting. If I didn't do those things, I feel like I would be failing. But the additional aspects of those things are that I'm raising my child, I'm training him, so that way when he gets to be a man and he's no longer under my jurisdiction, if you will, for a lack of better words, my authority, that I have trained him and parented him in such a way that he's a productive, kind, loving member of our society. And so far, I'm proud dad.
Well, so,
As you should be.
Yeah.
Rocky is incredible.
Good kid.
Yeah. And just like what you're saying too, like that's our reason for starting this podcast too, was we're like, if nobody else sees this, like if generations down the road get to hear from the voices that had an impact in our life and from us, then that's worth it. So I think that's so cool that reasoning lines up.
Yeah, but expound on that a little bit more though, because now you're excited about being a dad, but it wasn't so, was it, early on?
No. When I met Lisa, when we finally decided we were going to get married, actually before we decided we were going to get married, I told her I was never going to have kids. I didn't like kids. We got married in 1996. I was 20 years old when we got married. I was 17 when I met Lisa. So we dated for 3 years before we got married. And during that period of time, it was very clear, Aaron's not ever having kids. And if you're going to marry Aaron, you've just got to be resolved that that's the life that you're going to have. Interestingly enough, one of our former youth pastors had a daughter, and that daughter really took to me, really loved me. And it was that child showing me, that softened on God just used the kid to soften my heartstrings. And at first I contemplated the possibility of adoption. And then we decided to go ahead and have our own, biologically. And it was funny because nobody expected it. I mean, I actually got to the point where, people would look at me and they would say, when are you going to have kids? And I just looked at the people and said, we can't have kids. And it shut everybody up because they were putting me on the spot. I just put them on the spot. We can't have kids. They're like, oh, and they leave me alone. But I was ornery, always been ornery. But God started dealing with my heart, and actually my pastor at the time, one of the biggest fights that we ever had, we got along real well for years, but we butted heads on this. He told me, he says, Aaron, you need to have kids. And I said, I'm not ever going to do it. And this was just a couple of years before Rocky was born. He said, I'm telling you, you will never be the leader that you were called to be if you don't have kids. Now, he's not saying that nobody, if somebody doesn't have kids, that they're not ever going to be the leader they could be. That wasn't what he was saying. He was telling me, as my pastor, as my friend, as my mentor, that the leader that I would be stifled if I didn't have a child. And he was right. We decided at about 30 years old that we would try to have kids, and we had Rocky. I think I was 31 when we had Rocky, and maybe 32. Yeah, and the rest is history.
Can you expand on that a little bit more, just with the leadership? Like, how does being a parent help you grow in leadership?
That's a good question. For me, I had, you always think, the older you get, the more you realize that you don't know. And, as that 18-year-old kid that was saying, I don't ever want kids, I thought I knew what life was. I really thought I knew what I was going to be doing in life. I really assumed that I was going to move to Nashville, and in a couple of years, I'd be preaching on the biggest stages in the world. And, I thought I was on the fast track to ministry success, and kids didn't really amount to anything in that plan. And I just didn't know what I didn't know, to be honest with you, Madison. Through my 20s, I experienced some really, really difficult times through my 20s. Being a cop changed me. It opened my eyes to a lot of things in the world. In a lot of ways, it solidified some thoughts about not wanting to have kids, because I was dealing with the worst of the worst in society, dealing with evil people in politics, evil people on the street, the evil people in politics, running the evil people on the street. So I've seen a lot of bad stuff. And it put me in a spot where, I don't know, I was really jaded. And having Rocky, there's something about the first time that I saw my kid. It's like, at this point, my life is, I don't want to sound, I don't want it to be too melodramatic or whatever, but, I'm in my 20s. If I die, Lisa will remarry, life will go on, it would suck, but, come on, I mean, like, but there was something about having that kid that gave my life a deeper purpose than what I had had before. And beyond that, it also revealed to me, I had never really understood love. Now, I understood we study biblical words and the eros love between a man and a wife, but I had never really understood that love of a father. So my whole life, I had viewed God through a lens. Yeah, God loves me. Similarly, maybe to how I love my friend, or similarly to how I didn't understand when my mom and dad told me that they loved me. I didn't understand the depth of that. I do now. And as a leader, I can better identify with the heart of God towards people. I can better convey the heart of God towards people. And I also find myself to be a much more compassionate person when dealing with people that I would have otherwise not had tolerance for in a previous season of my life, simply because I recognize that they're children of God. And if God loves them as much as I love my child, then it gives the fear of the Lord a different definition to me. Because where I might have not had the tolerance. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I like everybody I come in contact with. As a matter of fact, I still get irritated almost on a daily basis coming in contact with people that I would prefer not be in contact with. Madison's laughing because she's worked with me. She knows that this is my communication style. but it's true. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I'm somehow been changed to the point where I like everybody. I love people. I don't like everyone I come in contact with, but I understand that if that was my son and somebody else was mistreating my son or was treating them, differently than I would as a loving father, then I might take issue with that. And to be honest with you, I don't want to be on that side of God's frustration. You know what I'm saying? So it gave me compassion. It gave me a heart to see people and God through a totally different lens. And ultimately, I think it's made me a better leader. It's also helped me to relate better with people who are hurting, people who have experienced loss, people who have experienced any number of just difficulties as it pertains to their children and their lives and just stuff. So that I guess is probably the long answer.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Well, while we're kind of going on a deep topic, so here's a kind of to continue on this trend then. So we're talking about parenting, but what would you say is the difference between parenting and fathering?
I don't think that there is one in my definition. I think that as a father, I think in order to be a good parent, you need to be a father or a mother. And I think that this is an area where most people find that they regret in their upbringing of children. At the end of their lives, when they look back on how they interacted with their kids and things. I think ultimately, I think anybody can birth a child, just about anybody can be a parent, if you will. But the choice to actually own that responsibility and to pour into and father and to help develop that person with intentionality to become a man or woman, and to be a productive member of society, to implement the proper disciplines without and what a balance that is, the disciplines without over taking it too far. I mean, my gosh, I was the experimental child. I was the oldest, and poor Rocky, he's the only child. And so guys, I'm gonna tell you very honestly, I have in tears apologized to that boy more than once in his lifetime. Dad was wrong. I screwed up. I did not handle that properly. I should not have done that way. I should not have said that. I should not have treated you that way. Lisa one time sat me down. This is the honest to God truth. And now you guys know my wife. Everybody else doesn't know her, but my wife is about half my size. And it's just a little thing. And she sat down on the steps. She sat up on some higher steps to where she was about eye level with me. And she looked at me and she very clearly told me one time, that will never happen again. I said, you're right. It will never happen again. Straightening me out. We all make mistakes, but I think it's an intentionality that for me, parenting, fathering is a constant, it is synonymous and a constant working towards bettering your child. But I think by definition, there are a lot of people out there probably that don't spend a whole lot of intentionality raising their kids, and subsequently might only categorize parenting through the lens of provision, of physical provision. I think that legacy goes much deeper than that. I think what we impart in our kids is far more valuable than money. I feel like I have some nice things, but I don't have some big nest egg put away to supply for my children and my children's children thing in the future. You know what I'm saying? It's not. I wish that there was more of that, but what I know lives beyond me, what I'm teaching right now, what I'm instilling right now, what I have been intentional to impart into my child, that will live beyond me, and it should live generationally beyond me, because the things that again, like I said earlier, if I died tomorrow, my son, I mean, I've told that boy every day of his life, your daddy loves you? And he says, yes. And I said, you know how much? And he says, so big. He said that since he was little, just little. And I still make him say it now at 14, your daddy loves you. Yes. And it's important to me that he knows that, because that is the legacy. As I'm looking at your sign between the two of you saying legacy builders, that is the legacy building aspect of it. Is you don't have to impart money, you don't have to have a lot of things, but if you have love and you're imparting love and you're intentional to be a loving parent, I believe that you're creating the legacy that long outlives your influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Along with that, like intentionality, I feel like you've been very intentional with Rocky to create kind of a discipline for the things that he's passionate about, and like a work ethic in him. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? And I just know he's in acting, he's had a lot of success so far. And so just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, he's a unique kid, and I'm cautious not to, boast too much about his accomplishments, just because the things that make me proud about him have little to do with his accomplishments. He's just blessed. God has gifted him with talents that are just stupid. it's not fair. People say favor ain't fair, and the kid's just got favor on his life. He has since he was a little boy. And so it's provided him opportunities that other kids might not, have with, he's an actor, and he's, he doesn't just compete at a local level. He competes at a world level in jujitsu. He'll be going back to the worlds this year. He'll be going to the nationals this year. He's a really talented kid, but he's put in the work. He told me, I guess he was probably 8 years old. We were driving down the street, and I asked him, I said, son, what do you want to do with your life? Ask an 8-year-old. I just was curious. And, I asked him first time, I asked him at 5 years old, I said, you're going to play a sport. What sport do you want to play? He said, I don't know. And so I started going through the different things of different sports. And when I got to jujitsu, martial arts, he wanted to be in martial arts. So I talked to him about the different forms of martial arts. I like jujitsu, so I may have had a little bit of an influence on convincing him towards that. But he ultimately decided he didn't want to play soccer. He didn't want to wrestle. He wanted to do jujitsu. And so at 5 years old, we put him in jujitsu, and he has gone, multiple days a week. Usually back then it was like 2 days a week. Well, I asked him at 8 years old, so he'd been in it for about 3 years. I said, Rocky, what do you want to accomplish in life? What do you want to do in your life? And he's just driving down the street. He looks, he says, Dad, I don't know. He says, but one thing I do think I want to be a world champion in jujitsu one day. I said, all right, well, Dad can help you do that. Like, I will do what's necessary to help you achieve that goal, but you're going to have to put in the work. I said, and going to the gym 2 days a week ain't going to do it. So if you want to be a world champion, if that is your goal to one day be a world champion, then you've got to go to the gym 4, 5, 6 days a week. Are you willing to do that? And he said, yes. And so we put him in the gym 4, 5, 6 days a week. And that has been his life. Now he's 14. That's been his life since he was 8. God has blessed us with, his coaches are world champions. And so he's being trained by some of the best, people who have been there. So they're taking him on the, the journey towards his goal. And man, I got nothing but complete faith that one day he'll be a world champion. It might even be this year. Who knows? He competed real well in the worlds last year. My expectations are, he could do it. So we'll see, but those are some of the things. Am I answering your question? I've talked so long that I've almost forgotten what the question was. You were talking about Rocky and disciplines. Part of it is my disciplines. Part of it's just me empowering him. Truth of the matter is he's not as disciplined as I'd like him to be. He doesn't get up on time like I would like him to. I'm much more structured, but I wasn't when I was his age. Don't tell him. I'd liked him to get up early and get started on his day and get his chores done and do his homework and, do those things that, a lot of kids don't want to do. And he's not as disciplined as some kids are, sometimes I got to stay on him. Sometimes I've got to take his privileges away in order to, if you didn't do what the expectations were, all right, well, here's what the punishment's going to be. Next time you don't do it, this is the punishment, and you can't blame me. I'm telling you what it's going to be. And then, next time I take those things away. So I'm consistent as much as I can be in my disciplines. Sometimes I think my wife is thinks I'm a little too hard, but I guess that's life. Mama balances where maybe I would be out of balance. I probably would be too hard. Mama would be too light. So between the two of us, he's turning out okay.
Yeah, no, he's great. But I do have a thought.
Well, I was just a little bit on what you said. A couple things. You had mentioned you take him to the gym and stuff, right? And so I think a lot of times people aren't willing to do that. Parents aren't willing to do that. So and sometimes even parents are trying to live their lives, and the things that they didn't accomplish in their life, they're trying to live them out through their kids. But I don't see you do that. I see you sacrificing to, you told him the truth of what needs to be done in order to become a world champion. And you're like, well, then it's a commitment on your part to take him to the gym 5, 6 nights a week. You could have just said, no, it's easy. The 2 nights a week fits our schedule. But, I think there's that aspect that needs to be recognized. And also that, that you're not trying to live your life through Rocky. He's his own person. You're trying to help support that and share with him the truths that need to be done.
Well, I'd be lying to say that there's not a little bit of vicarious living that I'm feeling. I mean, the kid's doing stuff that I would have only dreamed of doing. So there is some of that feeling. But what you're saying is 100% accurate. Lisa quit her job 3 years ago and homeschooled Rocky because his school wouldn't allow him to miss work for auditions, miss school for auditions. He was missing too much school. And they ultimately said, listen, if we're going to turn you over to the truancy board. So Lisa quit her job and homeschooled him. So that way he could pursue his dream in acting. Now, this year, this is a perfect example. We've just literally changed our whole life for the last 3 years. He came to us this past year and he says, Dad, I want to go to high school. I said, well, that could impact your acting. He says, I want to go to high school. I said, okay. And so we're empowering him with the decision that he's making. Now, what do I know? I know he's not going to like the structure. I know he's not going to like getting up that early in the morning. I know there's things he's gotten used to being homeschooled that he's not going to dig. But I know what he will love is that interaction with those students. He's going to have 650 kids in his freshman class, biggest school in our county. And so there'll be things that he'll thrive with. He'll have different relationships, different levels of relationships. Those are going to be good. But ultimately, to capitalize on what you said, the Bible says to train up a child in the way they should go. And when they're old, they won't depart from it. And so many parents take that to mean train up a child in the way they were trained, teaching them to do things the way that they were to do them. And I don't believe that's the case. I believe the way that they should go. If his passion was music, if his passion was the orchestra, if his passion was ballet, I would do everything that I could to empower him to pursue his passion, because that's what God's placed in him, and that's the way he should go. So my job as a father is not to mold him in my image. My job as a father is to take the giftings that God has put in me to help him mold him, help God mold him in the image that he created him to be in. There's nothing more frustrating than people putting demands on you that are unreasonable or outside of your desires for your own life. So parents, a lot of times they're like, no, you're going to do this. No, don't get me wrong. I've told Rocky, you're going to play a sport. I've told Rocky, you're going to take an instrument. You're going to learn these things. But when it comes to the choice of what direction, if he wants to play guitar, he can play guitar. If he wants to, play the cello, he can play the cello. It's just a matter right now of him pursuing the way that he should go. I'm just not going to let him be lazy. I'm going to empower him. Something that I've shared with Madison over the years and our staff, a lot of the staff, is that from a biblical standard, the two things that a leader is supposed to do is to protect and to empower. Those are our two primary jobs as leaders. And so in protecting him, I protect him from the things that he cannot see as a father, the things that he might not see, the things that my age, my experiences, my background will help to keep him from going down the wrong path, hopefully. And then to empower him to be the man that God has created him to be. So to empower his giftings, to empower and to use my resource as his father to help him to reach the goals that he has in his heart for himself, that ultimately I believe are God ordained, that God places the giftings, God places the talents, God places the callings on these children. And so it's my job. He gave the kid to me, so he knew the way that I was going to parent that kid. And so it's my job as his parent to help to protect and empower those giftings to the point of fruition.
Well, that's key. What you're talking about on the protection part of it. So a lot of times in the pursuit, and you're encouraging him to pursue passions and purpose, and there's that balance of protection. So you just told a story recently of a decision that you had to make in the area of some travels. And so now you had to make a tough decision. You even mentioned, hey, we're not perfect. We make mistakes, but now here's a situation that presented itself. Maybe tell us about that and kind of what your feelings and thoughts were through that and how that turned out. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, without naming names, Rocky auditioned for and was cast to be in the biggest show on Netflix at the time. And this has been a little bit over a year ago, but it's a huge opportunity. It was everything that he has worked for. And in Christmas of 2020, we got the call that he had booked the show and that they wanted him to fly to Canada and be in the show. And I was stoked until I thought about it. I was like, wow, this is the opportunity. And then it hit me, something doesn't feel right. And I told Lisa, I said, I think what's about to happen is that this COVID thing is about to get ugly and they're going to close the borders. And if they close the borders, you guys could get stuck in Canada. And I couldn't get to you, and there's nothing that I'd be able to do. And it just doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right. And I don't know how to process this. And, we thought about it, we prayed about it, and ultimately we sat Rocky down and we explained to him that he can't do this. And I told him, I said, son, I won't always know the why, but I know that this one isn't right. Even though it's a great opportunity, I know it's not right. And he was really disappointed. But about 2 months later, 3 months later, they closed the borders down. And I pulled out his iPad and I showed him the news article. And I personally knew people that worked for Amazon that ended up getting stuck in Canada for 8 months after they closed the border. And it was exactly what I thought could happen. And so in that moment, and I told him, I said, son, your dad's a bit prophetic. And, sometimes that's not always going to work to your benefit, but or not always going to dig it. But when dad knows something, I know something. And I wouldn't ever hold my son back from opportunity just for the sake of holding him back. But I knew it wasn't right. I couldn't tell him why it wasn't right. I felt like it might possibly happen, but the exact thing that I told Lisa that I thought might happen did. And I told Rocky, and then I showed him, and I was like, Dad, I'm just telling you, sometimes dad just knows. So yeah, it was a decision that, I literally had somebody today send me an article from that show. And they were like, oh, look at this. They didn't know that Rocky had been cast for it. And they were like, this is a great show. And they showed me a picture of it. And I just kind of went, yeah.
Oh, God's got one bigger for him coming up.
That's exactly what they said. Yep. That was the response when I told them the story. They said, well, God's got something else for him. And I agree. I believe that 100%. If he could book that one, he'll book another one. And if he doesn't, it just wasn't God's will. The gifting's there, the talent's there, the favor's there. So either it happens or it doesn't. But we don't fret the things that aren't. We just celebrate and thank God for the things that are.
Exactly. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So we went down this journey with you and Rocky and parenting and stuff. So where'd you learn all this? And tell us about your parents. Tell us about growing up in the Davis household. What was that like? Tell us about what some things that you remember from mom and dad.
How did they parent? Parents in the world. My mom and dad, Larry and Renee Davis. My mom is the sweetest person that I've ever met. She beat the death out of me twice growing up. One time was because I cussed at her. So I had it coming. But if you know my mom, you would know that for her to lay a hand on me, it had to be bad, and I had to have it coming, and I did. But my parents were great. My dad is the wisest man I've ever met. He and I are wired very similarly and very differently. It's a really neat. I have a lot of really great characteristics that I get from my father. I'm proud. Getting choked up. So I'm proud to be his son.
Yes.
I'm proud to have some of those great characteristics. I think he's imparted into me a lot of wisdom. I think I have a lot of perspective that I would have never gotten myself. I think I have disciplines in my life that I would have never had if he hadn't been my father. He saw in me the weaknesses of my personality type and helped me to overcome them, training up a child in the way that he should go. And even at the sacrifice, I think when I was younger, of knowing that it was going to cause difficulty, that I wasn't going to be happy with him, that I was going to to not appreciate the discipline and the lessons, but knowing that the training of a man was more important, that the things he was instilling in that season was more important than, I remember him telling me when I was a young boy, he said, "You may not like me, but you will respect me." And that was his way of saying, "Hey, listen, you are going to do what's right, even if my enforcing that causes you to resent it." And I think he did it right. And I know that I wouldn't be the man that I am today if he hadn't taken those hard stances sometimes to make sure that I became better than what I would have been by default. Yeah, there's no doubt. And I'm proud of the guy that I am today. So, and I know that I wouldn't be that man if it wasn't for my father.
So are you gonna grow the beard out too, like your dad? And
No, this is as long as I want it. My dad has a real long beard and he puts it in rubber bands. It's about this long. And
yeah,
I like my beard about this length, and I'll just keep it this length, I think.
he's had that for quite a while, hasn't he? I've ever since I've known him come. I think probably when I landed at a church over there is probably almost 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so he's had that style ever since I've known him.
He used to have long hair, it was like below his shoulders, and it was gray. It was it wasn't salt and pepper, like it was gray. And he looked like, there's a scene in the movie The Rock where Sean Connery is walking in and there's a light behind him. He's got this long hair and it's kind of bouncing, and it always reminded me of my dad because my dad had that long hair and that like Sean Connery did in The Rock. So.
Well, we are coming up on time, and so we have one final question for you.
Okay.
But just what is the greatest lesson you have learned either from your parents or from being a parent yourself?
The greatest lesson that I've learned. That's a tough one.
I know it's hard to probably just choose one, but
yeah, it's and I think I have to go back to the beginning. That the greatest lesson that I've learned from being a parent is what love really means.
Yeah.
I really think that that's it. I know so many people grow up. I don't understand it. It baffles my mind to process parents who don't properly love their kids, because for me, becoming a father helped to define love. I couldn't. That's the greatest lesson. I understand love on a level that I never would have understood any other way. I understand the love of my father. The hard decisions that my dad had to make, the sacrifices that he had to make. I understand the love of God. These being lessons that I learned from becoming a father that I would have never understood any other way. Yeah, I think that I know that almost sounds cliche, but it's the full circle. I think I understand what it means to really love after becoming a father.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I mean, I'd never, until you had kind of talked about that and sharing your story, I'd never really thought of it that way. And because a lot of times, Madison, she's a processor. She wants to know how do you do this? How do you do that? And I said, Madison, my answer and response is a lot of times not how, it's why. And so that helps me even define, some of the things that she'll see me do for the family, for her, for Riley, for the kids. It's a matter of why. And it's that love that you talk about that is, even right now, as you telling that, is helping me to understand why I do.
Yeah.
It's that love that is just, you just can't understand it until you're in that position.
Yeah.
And
this is what I think why the Bible says that love never fails. You can do the wrong thing in love and it will still, it was still done in love. You always can go, hey man, I may have made the wrong choice, but I made the best choice that I could because I loved, and it ended up being the wrong thing. But if you did it in love, you can sleep at night knowing you made a mistake, even though it was in love. It's when you do the other things that aren't rooted in love that sometimes it's harder for your head to hit the pillow at night.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for coming on and for sharing this. And you truly are an incredible dad, Pastor Aaron. And so thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Well, I sure love you guys. Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Well, and we're gonna make sure. Are you okay with this, Sharon? Like where people can find you? I mean, you tattoo preacher on Instagram. I mean, we're going to tag all that on our episode. So if you want to find, Pastor Aaron Davis, we'll
tattoo preacher.
Tattoo preacher, and and so we'll put all those underneath when we release the episode. And where to find his books. You'll be able to find the books, Limitless and Quantum Christianity. You'll be able to find those, and
those are all.
He puts out a lot of great stuff. On Amazon. So we'll have links to all that, and just we encourage you to follow him. And he puts out a lot of good stuff on Instagram. I'm not a big Instagram person.
A lot of funny things too.
Yeah, a lot of funny
things.
things.
The dad meme the other day, where it was just like the serious face. Half of parenting is just looking at your kids like this, like.
Oh, is he the one that posted that? Madison showed me that one. Yeah.
Loved that. So yes, definitely follow Tattoo Preacher.
So yeah, again, appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, and thanks to listeners. I know you've got a lot out of this one. So check out Aaron Davis and all his stuff, and read the books. It will be well worth it. So thank you all for tuning in, and thank you again, Aaron, for joining us and helping us out. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today on the Legacy Builders podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you are notified when a new episode is posted. Now go out and take your first steps in building your family's legacy.